I'm going to start off by just doing a little bit of something that you all know. When we have families and we have a son or daughter with this disability, the normal kind of progression that we expected is not something that happens. And so families are oftentimes left in situations where they're faced with things that they were not expecting. They need to learn new services. They need to learn new ways of helping their son or daughter. And particularly when we get into adulthood, there gets to be a range of issues that are very, very complex. And how we support people with disabilities as adults, once they hit the age of 18, is one of the issues that people really need a lot of support through that process. So we're going to go ahead and address some of the issues and how we can do that tonight in tonight's workshop. And I would like to start off by talking about that decision-making is a learned skill. It is not something that we're born with, and it's not something that happens without practice. And we think about how decision-making typically, in a typically developing child, how decision-making skills develop. And most people develop both responsibility and decision-making skills through some very typical kinds of things that happen in adolescence. In adolescence, if you have a typically developing child, that child will start to drive, that child will start to date, have their first job, and make plans to move away from home. Those are things that may or may not happen with a person with disability, but those are things that are very, very important in terms of us, and in terms of a child starting to see themselves not as a child anymore, but learning new responsibility, learning new skills. And it's also important for us as parents. When a child starts to do those things, it forces us to look at the child in a different way. It forces us to say, if we're going to allow our son or daughter to start to work, if our son or daughter is pushing to move away from us, if when they are starting to date, then we need to see them differently, and we need to start to prepare them with opportunities that will help develop those skills. And when a child is not doing those on that usual kind of platform, then we need to be very conscious about how do we replace some of those markers? How do we replace some of those opportunities so that our child is starting to develop those kinds of responsibilities, that different view of themselves as an adult, and also those opportunities that allow us to distance from a person with disability and allow them to develop as a full sense of themselves. So we'll talk about some ways that we can do that. But I think it's a really important thing to recognize that having a child with disability requires us sometimes to put some things in that aren't required. And it causes us to be very intentional with how we're going to develop these skills that sometimes appear to develop very naturally and easily for a child who's typically developing, who has these experiences. One of the things that I always have a problem with is the idea, sometimes we'll hear people who are full adults who have a developmental disability being seen and treated as a child. And I'm not talking about just from the parents. I'm talking about our service system. I'm talking about the entire way that our society does this, where we sometimes keep an adult acting as a child. And one of the things that's important to recognize is, regardless of whether or not the person develops, how they develop intellectually, that people do develop abilities to discern things that they like and things that they don't like, people that they can trust, people that they shouldn't trust. They can learn who they can rely on and who they can go to for help, and they can learn from the successes and failures. So One of the things that's important is, again, that we recognize that even if a person will continue to need support and continue to help throughout their life, that they are capable of learning these basic kinds of things that feed into decision making. So that's an important point that we establish. On a very basic level, I want to talk about supported decision making. And the way that we're explaining it here is supported decision making is when one or more people will help anybody to explain information, to explain choices that are available, and explain issues to that. We'll simplify things, that we will spend extra time in the explanation of what a person can do. We oftentimes need, within supported decision making, to slow processes down. Much of what happens is, you think about like going to a doctor's visit. There's a lot of information that's being presented. As that first point says, it's oftentimes very complex, complex in ways that we don't need to be. That we need to stop the process and say, so what you're saying is, or I think I need you to break that down. What do you mean by that word? What do you mean by that? Slowing the process down goes hand in hand with simplifying information and explaining information. It's also really important that we help people when they're faced with situations, that we help people to think, you maybe never have moved out before, but you have had to make changes in your life. For example, moving out. You haven't moved out yet in your life before, but you remember when you made the jump from elementary school to high school? You remember how hard that was? You remember some of the things that were different about that experience? Or in that same situation, as we're talking about someone about moving away, do you remember the time that I had to leave for the weekend or for a week and someone else supported you during that time? So helping people to reflect on situations that they've experienced in the past that they can draw information and strength from. That will help people to weigh options. One of the things that is so important about decision making is that when we just throw out, what do you want to do in this situation? That's oftentimes not fair, because oftentimes people don't really know what their options are. So one of the important things with supported decision making is laying out a full range of options. And I say that really intentionally, laying out a full range of options, not just the options that I think are the best, not just the options that are, the ones that I think you even want to hear, but let's make sure that we really give people a range of options that they can consider, that will help them to develop decision-making skills. And again, that's a process where people need to be assured oftentimes that you can do this, that you do have the ability to do this. And we oftentimes need to not only put these options out there, but we need to organize them in a way that's not all auditory, that we're just not saying you can do this, this, and this, that we maybe need to draw some representations, put them on boards so that people can really see the choices, the issues, and slow the process down, but then also gives time and space for the person to make that decision with encouragement. Oftentimes people, when I say develop decision-making skills, oftentimes people will wait for you to make the decision. We have oftentimes conditioned people that we will make the decision for you. So helping people to make decision-making skills, develop that capacity for decision-making skills, is a process of us doing all of those steps and then assuring people that they can make the choices and that the choices are not irreversible. That it's possible that you'll make a choice that later on you're going to want to change, and that's okay. So, and the very last one, communicate choices when needed. When we talk about helping people to communicate their choices, it's oftentimes assumed that what we're talking about there is someone who doesn't have a strong vocabulary and who can't do a very rich explanation of what they want to do. But I'm going to ask people, how many times have you, well, let me ask, have you ever seen a situation to where a person with a disability has communicated their choice, has said, I want to do this, and that statement was not heard? Is that something that you've seen? I have seen it repeatedly. I see it, and again, I want to make real clear, I'm guessing mostly families out here. I'm not saying that that just happens within the families. I see it within our services, within our schools, where people are saying exactly what they want, and that those choices are not heard, not respected, or not acted on. So communicating choices is oftentimes being someone who is part of that conversation, and when a person says what they want, or makes a decision, or makes any statement, and the conversation keeps happening as if that statement wasn't made, that we stand in and we say, it's important that we just heard what Tom said. Can someone repeat what he said? Tom, would you like to repeat what you said? So communicating choice, helping people to communicate choices goes beyond when people aren't able to have a strong vocabulary. It's oftentimes, again, making sure that the things that people are saying are heard, that they're responded to, and that they're acted on as possible. So I'm going to just say this. None of this is new, right? We all ask for help. We all need help in our life. This asking for help and needing help with our decisions is not a disability issue. Asking for help is something that we all do. We all need help in our lives. These examples that are up here, when we have an important medical visit, hopefully we're talking to people about that who we trust. Sometimes we need to bring people to those appointments so that we can, again, have those same things that I described earlier. For someone to ask the questions that we're not ready to ask. For someone to slow a process down and say, you know what, we need a second here. So we all need to have this happen. Hopefully if we're signing a contract, we're doing something that's hard and new for the first time, hopefully again, we're bringing people who have more experience into that. When there's times when people need help with everyday things like just developing a budget, developing something that is not in their usual comfort zone. I'm someone who really needs help from my wife with structure. And she does a fantastic job with helping me with that, because that's not my skill. But she really steps in and helps me with that. And then the final example here is that we oftentimes, when we have difficult relationships, we turn to people who ask this. So I'm going to say it again. This is not a disability issue. With that said, though, I'm going to ask this. Do you think that there's a difference in the number of times someone with disability may need support? Oftentimes, yes. Whereas we have had many experiences that we can draw from, many people with disabilities have fewer experiences, and so they need someone who can go through things that they have not experienced or don't have the information about. So it is something that we all experience, but it's something that people with disabilities oftentimes experience at a greater frequency and maybe with a greater amount of support. And we'll talk about why that's important in a bit. So I'm just going to ask you, from your perspective, from your experience, how does it feel when you've had someone who's really supported you? And I'd like for someone to just call out something. How has it felt when you've had someone who supported you? It's comfortable. You gain comfort in terms of being able to do what you're working on. I like to point out, these are the responses we usually get. And it's true for many of us. It's true because oftentimes, if we are someone who don't have a disability, we are being approached in a way that's respectful. We're being approached in a way that is giving us a lot of freedom in our ultimate choices. So it is true, when support is done well, it feels safe, it feels comfortable, it relieves our anxiety. When support is done poorly, how does it feel? Overbearing. It feels overbearing. It can oftentimes feel like we're not really given a choice at all, right? And it can feel frustrating. It can actually increase our anxiety. And it can really undermine who we feel we are. So it's important that we think about, as I said in the last slide, many people with disabilities require support more often than I do. They require a greater degree of support, and when it's done poorly, and it oftentimes is, it can undermine who we are, how we feel about ourselves, and our abilities to even make future decisions. So it's really important that we think about how we support and how we allow other people to support loved ones who have disabilities. How does it feel when we're the supporter? I'm going to ask that. How does it feel when you are in that role of helping someone? So those are two times when we oftentimes do need to support. Medical issues are something that oftentimes require support. And we oftentimes, when we do have people with language barriers, we need to be the ones who are acting in, right? So it's funny, I asked this at a workshop in the Bay Area, and one of the people said that it feels really good to be the supporter unless the person doesn't do what I say. And I laughed really, and I was like, well, we need to really rethink if you're offering support or if you are really crossing a line from support to director of this person's life. So supporting can feel really good. It can feel like I've accomplished something. It can feel really frustrating at times. It can. So we need to, again, as we move into a very conscious role of supporter in supported decision making, we need to really think about, like, what are we doing and how are we doing it so that we're both respecting the other person and that we can also take on that level of support without feeling that we are the person who's suffering the consequences when something goes wrong. So we need to really examine both sides of this. When families are able to build a support network and have other people come in and support alongside the family, the person that they are caring for, there are amazing gifts that come when that happens. First of all, it really enriches the lives of the people, of the entire family, really. It allows the person with disability to experience new things that's not part of the family traditions. It also can allow families to feel that they are off the treadmill and that they're not constantly in the supporting role, that they can experience things broader beyond support kinds of requirements. So it's very energizing. It, as I said earlier, it brings in, when we bring in other people who can become and assist with the support, then it can bring in new perspectives, it can bring in new opportunities. And most importantly, and this is something that's very hard for me in my role, I oftentimes meet parents who are in their 60s or 70s who are still very, very worried about what's going to happen. And they oftentimes say, if something happens to me, and I have to gently bring it back to when something happens to you, something will happen. Something will disrupt the support that families are able to bring. So when people are able to increase the number of people in the lives of a person with disability who are there to offer support, it brings in all this other information, all this extra ability for people to have broader experiences. But most importantly, it really brings in this safety net that says that when I'm no longer able to be the supporter, when I'm no longer here to do the level of support, and at some point maybe not be able here at all to support in any area, that I know that there are people in my son or daughter's life who will be there and will be able to offer support. I'm going to show a real quick video. Some people may know Dave. He came in for an interview, and I have two quick clips that we'll watch and we'll have a short discussion on.
Been evolving with each round of care providers. Kind of as I talked about earlier, I move a little bit more into the background and let them have more control, more decision-making power, and more interaction with the group. And honestly, I mean, I am still learning how to manage that. It's one thing when you're making all the decisions. Then everybody knows, you know, like it or not, Dave's making all the decisions. When you start to spread that out, now you have to create a whole nother dynamic. And now you've got a whole new group of personalities that you need to make mesh and work together. And I'm learning how to do that, and I'm very focused on that, because at some point down the road, I will need to kind of step back from the picture and let others fill that role. So really what I'm hopeful is that I can always have a lead, one or two lead people that are empowered.
So Dave and his son have really invested a lot in Sam having a full, rich life. And Dave is someone who's really invested to say, you know, I can make this wheel spin for as long as I'm here, but at some point, there's gonna need to be people who know Sam, who are here to support him, and here to guide not only him, but also the system around him in a way that Sam's life is going to be as good as it is now when I'm no longer here. One of the things he says that I think is really significant, when you bring new people into the situation, it complicates things. If you're the only supporter in a person's life, it's hard, but it goes in one direction, and you can count that it'll always be done the way that you want it done and the way that it's comfortable. You can count on it. It's very, very predictable. So Dave is saying that he understands how important it is, but it's also difficult. Okay. Something else that he's saying here is that you can't develop this support team overnight. You've got to start now, because it takes a while to cultivate the people who are going to be part of the team, and it takes a long time, we'll talk about this a little bit more, it takes a long time to pass that information and to develop the competence of the team to do what you have learned to do by yourself. And it's important you think about that. You've had the opportunity as a family to grow up with your son or daughter, to learn how to support, learn the needs that they have, and learn all the information that you now hold to be the supporter that you are. That's not something that you can just drop on someone and think that they're going to develop those skills and have that knowledge. So Dave is saying some really key things here. And it's hard. You see as he's talking, this is not an easy conversation. It's not an easy conversation. But it's an important one. And it's important realization that he's come to. I'm going to show this next video, and I want you to try to pay attention to some of the ways that Dave has been, not just Dave, but his team have been very intentional with how they do things to bring out the richness in Sam's life. And I'm going to set this up by saying that Sam is someone, an amazing young man, and does not have a real deep verbal communication. He communicates very, very well, not in nonverbal, expressive kinds of ways, but not real deep verbal communication. So I want you to pay attention to some of the techniques that come from this example that Dave gave in this clip. And we'll try to draw some lessons and think about, this is one small example, but we'll try to think about like how we can spread this out in other situations that are not the one that are mentioned in this video.
You know, social media helps everyone stay connected, as we all know, and with Sam's alumni, that is particularly important. Sam has his own Facebook page, and is friends with probably more people than I'm friends with on my Facebook page, and stays in touch with really all of the alumni. I mean, it's pretty rare that there isn't somebody that's been in his life that isn't, you know, connected with him in that way. And then from time, you know, we do make an effort as well to stay in touch and keep them connected. But Sam also does. Sam loves to be in touch with the people that have been in his life. And really, no matter how far back that goes. He has a communication device. He's got a people page. Most of the alumni are on that people page, and he'll navigate to it and talk about somebody that he is interested in having a conversation about. We've got, for example, last weekend, we reached out to one of Sam's alumni who's away at college and just said, hey, you know, can you FaceTime? And so we set up a time, and Sam and she spent probably 30, 45 minutes, you know, going back and forth and having a little bit, and with, of course, a support person with Sam, and you know, and the support people all become friends as well, and so there's just this, it becomes a community.
So this is the example that Dave's giving is using Facebook and social media. And I, you know, this is always one of those challenging discussions that families have about like how safe is social media, and I don't want to get into that conversation tonight. But I do want to draw what social media has done in this situation. Okay. So, as I said, and as Dave pointed out, Sam uses a communication device. And who did he, in this situation, who did Sam want to communicate with? Remember? Someone who used to be in Sam's life who's now away at college. Okay. There's something that's really significant about that. So first of all, you know, social media is a way for that interaction to happen. But before we even get there, I want to point something out. Sam communicated that he wanted to talk to this person by going to a people page that's on his communication device. Okay. So in Sam's situation, I don't know. I'm guessing that there may be pictures of the people, you know, in his life. I have been with a lot of families with communication devices. And Dave does something here, and the team did something here that many families did not do. Many families, when you think about it, I'm sorry, but when you think about it, we tend to be very, very pragmatic, right? This staff is no longer here, so what do we typically do? We take off that picture, right? Many families would just, and many families and many services would do this exact same thing that I have seen repeatedly. The person's no longer here, we take that picture off. What does that do in this situation if we took that picture out? As soon as we take that picture away, we've taken away the opportunity to ever have a conversation about that person again, unless we initiate it. So we have to be so careful about how we do things so that we can allow people to continue to have a choice. This is a very small situation, but it really has a lot that we can dig through. Go back to that same situation. So Sam goes to the people page. Fortunately, that picture's still there, so he can communicate that he wants to talk about this person. Many times when I've seen people do that, the conversation becomes me saying, yep, Sally used to be a staff here. She's off to college. And that's the end of that conversation. We tend to not, again, we have to be careful. How do we do things to really promote people to have choices beyond what we simply offer? If we take the picture off, we're taking away the offering of Sam saying, I want to talk about this. If we're not careful how we facilitate the communication, and he points to Sally in this case, I'm making that name up, and we simply say, yep, she used to be here, boy, she was a really good person, and we maybe tell one story, then we've taken away that ability for the person with a disability to really move beyond that, anything that we're offering. The question was, in this situation, it was a person who has engaged Sam's life. The word was used as an alumni, which means probably a paid staff or someone who was there for a specific reason. The person's moved away. So do we, in those situations, as people move out of our lives, do we continue to say, we would like to stay engaged with you? That's a very personal question. My encouragement is that when you think about it, who are the people in our lives? They're people who may have started in one sphere and become closer to us and that we maintain contact with. I think what I would say about your question, Callie, is that oftentimes we make the assumption that the people are only in our lives of a person with disability because they're getting paid to do that. And we oftentimes, in many ways, cut that relationship. We cause the cut. And again, I'm not saying families. I'm saying services do. I'm saying our system kind of has that expectation. So in this situation, Sam navigated to the page. He said he really pointed to the person. And the next step was, you know what? We should reach out to her, to this person that Sam has said that he's thinking about it in this moment. How did they contact her? Did they call her on the phone? They used FaceTime. And again, small situations, small choices that make a huge difference in outcome. Sam is, again, someone who doesn't have a lot of verbal communication, but he expresses himself very richly through a lot of other ways. Using FaceTime was, they said, like a 30-minute conversation. I'll bet you if we called up on the phone, it would have been a 3 or 4 minute conversation, and it would have been simply her reporting something to him, and then when she was done, that's the end of that conversation. So this is a very small example, but when we go through our day and we think about how do we support someone who may have limited ability to express their needs, we can find this example 100 times over each day. And the small choices that we make a difference between a person truly being engaged in that decision, truly engaged in the outcome, or us determining and oftentimes doing it in a way that's going to give very little back as compared to something where we look towards how do we make this the richest opportunity, not only for Sam, but for that person who used to work with him. That person didn't need to take the call. They didn't need to agree to it. And if they agreed to it, they certainly didn't need to spend 30 minutes. So we oftentimes undermine not only the choices, but the outcomes. And we do it in ways that we're just not thinking about. So one of the things I encourage through this supported decision-making process is us to really take a look at what are the ways that we can find to help people to have the maximum outcomes of what they're doing. How do we keep them fully engaged? How do we make sure that we're not taking away opportunities for people? So again, we'll look at some tools. So developing supporting relationships, and this goes to one of the things that you said, or that you asked about, Kelly. One of the things that's important when we take a look at saying, I want to bring other people into the life of someone who has a disability so that they can have a role with support, that they can have a role with becoming involved in a person's life. The first one is believing that people want to be involved. It's not uncommon to think that the only people who will engage with a person with disability is someone who's paid. And that once they are in that life, and that pay stops or that role stops, that relationship will end. And oftentimes, if we simply leave the door open and say, you know what, you guys have a special bond. I saw something between the two of you that was really cool, and this person really looks forward to seeing you. That's oftentimes all it takes, is just believing that the person would be interested and believing that the person does not just engage because of pay or because of a specific role. So, along with that is the idea that relationships oftentimes change. We oftentimes do start off in a specific role in every relationship we have, not just with people with disabilities. And that those relationships can evolve from a professional or a very formal kind of relationship into a deeper personal relationship. So this idea of when we see someone making a connection, of instead of always seeing that as a threat or something that could be weird, that we invite the possibility that this could be a relationship that is meaningful and personal. And so helping people to what we call it repotting a relationship from one type of relationship into another. Helping people to realize that when we are looking and inviting people into supporting relationships, that we should probably start small. We shouldn't say, hey, can you come over and do a big kind of role with the person? But just perhaps, moving from a gym situation. There's a friend of mine had a relationship with her daughter with a disability, had a relationship with someone at a gym a staff member at the gym, and really helped develop that into an off-site relationship. And started with very small things, and eventually it turned into a situation where the person actually asked to attend a formal meeting because they really saw some things that they thought that staff needed to support the physical kinds of things that she recognized were important outside of the gym. So starting small in practice, realizing that oftentimes in any time that we're thinking about developing friendships or relationships of our own, most people that we engage with are not going to end up being our friends or best buddies. And when we are doing this in an intentional way, it's oftentimes if we ask 3 or 4 or 5 people and we don't get an immediate response back that we feel that like this is not going to happen. In our relationships, our personal relationships, we have cast a very broad net. We have engaged many, many people, and a small number of people actually develop into that relationship. So as we do this intentionally, it can feel artificial, and it can feel like, oh my gosh, I've checked in with 4 or 5 people, and so far no one's really engaged in this other type of relationship with me. So therefore it won't happen. But it takes a lot. And again, that's something that Dave talked about in his talk. So we need to be persistent, and we need to know that no one is ever going to step into that primary supporter relationship. When we start to bring other people into supporting relationships, we need to understand that most people are going to be short-term and do a small amount of the work that we do. And so it's important that we recognize that what we are building is a team that is people who have specific roles, specific knowledge, specific ways that they engage with us. They're not going to be us. They're not going to take on the entire situation. But one of the things I love that Dave talked about is that at the very end, he said that his team becomes a community. And they support each other. And at this point, when you get a good team assembled, it will oftentimes start to generate further invitations from the team members themselves rather than just you. Do people hear what I'm saying there? Initially, it's going to be the primary supporter is going to be making all the invitations. But as that team grows, the team starts to make invitations. And that can be scary because you're like, wow, I didn't make this invitation. I don't know this person. But you have to, again, realize that's what we're building towards. We're building towards a team that can become self-generating and self-sustaining outside of us being the primary person who's organizing that. So just talk for a second. What are some of the roles that other people can come in and be supporters in? What roles can they fill? And supporters can be people who come in and explore and support social opportunities. They can certainly come in and bring in their different kinds of experiences, their different kinds of things that they have connections with. They can share knowledge of services and key information. And for many people, again, we have not experienced the life of disability prior to us having that first family, if you're a professional, or if you're a family member, your son or daughter having a disability. So having a broader support network is oftentimes a way that you're going to learn about things that you would never know and never be able to take advantage of if you were a small, insular group of your own. And finally, and most importantly, having a team is something that builds a memory vault. And we'll talk about what a memory vault is. You think about, again, I said this earlier, for families, you have grown up with your son or daughter. You have learned so much information about everything that needs to happen, the people that you can call on when you need support, how you gear up for a doctor appointment, who the doctors are, the medication schedule. There are so many things that are in your head. And one of the things that I think is really interesting is when I talk to families who have a son or daughter with disability and they have a sibling. And they say, oh, it's okay. When I'm no longer able to support, his brother is able to step into that role. Her sister is going to be able to step into that role. One of the things I'll challenge families on, first of all, is we don't know what's going to happen in our son and daughter's lives. We don't know if they will be, what their jobs are, what their marriage situation is, where they will end up actually living. So that's a really risky strategy to say, I have someone who I know will always be there. But even if that's true, I'm going to say that most families really believe that the sibling of the person with disability knows more than they know. They oftentimes don't know all the stuff that you know. They don't know who the doctor is. They don't know how to do those visits. They don't know, all of the things that have become second nature to you that you kind of feel everyone knows, or that someone can easily pick up. And in addition to those families not having that information, they also haven't actually practiced it. It's more than knowing who to call. It's more than knowing what needs to happen. It's knowing how to do that in a way that's going to be effective, that is going to be helpful. And on the person with the disabilities end, they need to see and feel comfortable that someone else not only knows this information, but that we've developed a relationship that allows those processes to happen. So it's more than just that we can pass this on. People need to practice it. People need to really be given the opportunity to support with those different roles that we need to step away from. And the person who's receiving that support, they need to know that this other person, that they're capable of that job. So I'm going to encourage us to think about this memory vault, because it's something that's really, really important. If we do not encourage a broader team who knows all this information, when we are no longer there, all of this has to be recreated. And it's a very, very difficult and disruptive thing to happen. So, and there's some things that you just can't replace. If I'm the one who knows who to call, and then I am no longer present to say, oh, let's call John in this situation, no one's going to know to call John. No one's going to know who to do that. Eventually, someone else will rise up, and things will gradually be pieced together in a new way. But it's really important that we think about this, and we not only think about it, we start to develop the team that can carry this information, this wisdom, and these relationships into those support roles. So this is not to at all minimize. As Dave said in his video, and I'll say clearly up front, it is not easy to bring in other people. It's not easy to find people. It's not easy to relinquish those roles. It's not easy to do it. People are busy. It's a hard ask, and it's a hard thing to take on. But one of the things I encourage people to think about is it's not a unique situation that people need to bring in other people in these kinds of supports. I have been with many families, or many people who don't have a son or daughter with developmental disability, who experience cancer, experience some kind of disruption in their life, who make these same kinds of asks, and people are willing to enter into it. So I encourage people to, before they say, this can't be done, to recognize and think about in your own life, have you seen this done? And I would venture to guess that you have seen it done. And it is something that is hard, it takes time, it takes effort, but it's important and it is possible. And I would encourage for people who are walking through this kind of thing, this process, to have conversation and support with other people who are doing it, and that you would even consider, if you have a friend who also has a child or also has someone that they're supporting, that you guys work towards even supporting each other through that process, both emotionally as well as possibly in a very real physical kind of way as well. But again, this is something that I know is not easy, but it is an important process for us to start and start that process of just working towards towards developing. And again, recognize that initially it will all have to be us making those requests. But eventually, as we develop a broader team, that team will assist with that process of recruiting others as well. The concern is that it's easy for us to look amongst our peers when we're looking at developing a support network. And if there are peers, there are age, and our supports will naturally fade at the same time. I would like to say a couple things about that. The first one is that by branching out even to your age peers, first of all, you are in the short term at least creating a safety net, and you're really casting this knowledge and this relationships beyond yourself, which is important in itself. It's important in itself because you are, first of all, getting used to having other people in those roles, which is a hard thing. It's also important in that as we do start to generate downward kinds of leads, we're also increasing the number of people who are working towards that process, who also know other people in those younger ages. One of the things that as we talked about earlier, oftentimes there will be at least some people who will be from staff or former staff who develop those relationships, and they tend to be younger. So that's one area where we can find those younger people to enter into relationships. And frankly, another situation is as people with disabilities age, their peers are aging as well. And we oftentimes find that when people enter their 20s and maybe into their 30s, that their peers who knew them through school and other kinds of things are people that we can recruit into relationships. So depending on your age and depending on the age of your child, initially it may need to be just amongst your peers because a lot of their peers are too young themselves to be in those roles. There's a wide range of resources that are available on supported decision-making. I wanted to highlight this one with supported decision-making teams, setting the wheels in motion. This was actually a project that was funded by another WITH grant that happened with the ARC and a few other partners. And this is a very good guide as well as the resources that are at the end of the book. But I just wanted to highlight this one before we moved on. We're going to focus a little bit, and we're going to talk a little bit about how supported decision-making can be done in a more formal process. And we're moving away from support teams that we've just been talking about more into the role of supported decision-making. So we're doing a little bit of shift. There's many different ways to do supported decision-making. You can do it very informally. You can create an agreement. If you do decide to go the route of an agreement, there are many different agreements that people can choose from. And what I've done in the next slides is I've extracted small portions of the agreement so that we can show them up on the slide and discuss them. This is a sample agreement, and notice, first of all, that the language in this is very simple. And I'll read it out loud real quick. This agreement must be read out loud or otherwise communicated to all parties to the agreement in the presence of either a notary or two witnesses. The form of communication should be appropriate to the needs and preferences of the person with disability. So this is the very opening part of the agreement. And again, do you think that that's a fairly well phrased, easy to understand kind of thing? We want this agreement to not just be understood by the people who are supporters. We want it to be understood by the person that we're supporting. So I'm going to, first of all, just highlight an issue. It says that this agreement should be signed either in the presence of a notary or witnesses. I'll be honest, at this point, California, supported decision-making in some states, Texas and Delaware, and a few others, they actually have supported decision-making as a legal process, a formalized legal process. California doesn't have that. Nevada is moving towards that very rapidly. California is moving towards it, but it's going to be a couple of years, I believe, before we get it. At this point, we don't need a notary. I do encourage, though, that as we create supported decision-making, that we do it in the presence of the group, and that we have more than one person if we do go the route of making an agreement. Because we want to ensure that it's been explained in an easy-to-understand way, that there's no coercion involved, and that things are really being understood and acted on in good faith. This next slide is for the person with a disability, and it shows my name is, as a person with a disability, my name is, and today's date. And then it says this: I want to have people I trust help me to make decisions. The people who help me are called supporters. My supporters are not allowed to make choices for me. I will make my own choices with support. I am called the decider. So this is something that's really significant for a person to understand. By entering into this agreement, I'm not saying I give up my ability to make choices. I'm just saying I need help. And I want to formalize this within this agreement. And this is a really significant issue, not just in terms of forming the agreement, but oftentimes people have never really been told, you can make a choice. You need help, but you can make it. And we are going to make sure that everyone who gives you support understands how to give support in a way that you can still make your choice. So this is also for the person with disability. And it says, my supporters are, and the first slide says supporter number 1, and it gives the information, their name, address, phone number, email. And this is obviously a very small list. I've taken a very long list of options that they have given, and just to fit it on a slide, I've cut it down to just a few things. But it's an opportunity for the person with a disability to say, I want supporter number 1. I want my friend John to help me, and I'm going to check the boxes that I want help in. How many people do you think have ever been asked, what do you think you need help with? It's not a very common thing in our system. Many people with disabilities experience their life with, I think you need to do this. This is what you need to do. This is what you are able to do. Our system does not honor people with the ability to say, what do you feel you need help with? This is an opportunity to go through this. And I've done this with several people. This seems like it would be a straightforward situation, but there's a couple things that really have stood out to me. First of all, we're asking who they want to support them. They've oftentimes never been asked, who do you want to be involved in your decisions? And one of the things that's really hard is for many people to say, well, I think everybody. And you have to, and to work and you say, well, who do you really trust? Who do you think is the good person to help you with these choices? And oftentimes people are really afraid that they're going to offend someone by not having everybody they know on this agreement. It's a great conversation. This is a very, very important conversation. If we want to keep people safe, if we want people to be in a situation to where they are safe, they need to understand that not everybody should have a vote in their life. That's a really important statement, and it's something that we do not do typically with the people that we work with. So that's the first thing, is that we're telling a person, you get to choose who helps you. The second thing is, you get to choose what you want help with, and if you don't mark that I want help with my health, then we're not going to do that. And the question always is, well, what happens if they really need help with that, with that thing? The nice thing about this is that this is a changeable document. Oftentimes, what people need is the ability to take a little bit of risk and say, you know what, I think I really do need help with this. And so this is an ability for people to make a document, to make these decisions, but also to let them know we can change this when we need to. And it's okay. If you feel like you want to take a little risk with this area, we're not going to let things go to an absurd length, of course. But we need to honor, as much as possible, people having an ability to say, I don't need help with that, or I don't think I do, or I don't want it right now. So let's take a look at the next slide. And I want to go back and forth. It's the same thing, except for now this one says supporter number 2. So this is an opportunity for the person to say, oh, like maybe I want John to help me with making decisions about what kinds of places that I can go to, what kinds of, maybe even which doctor I want to go to. But I don't need to ask John to do everything else. And maybe John is really a good person to talk to about my social situation, but he's not someone I should really talk to about my money or about my housing, about those kinds of things. So this is, again, it's a cool opportunity to have the discussions with people about who in your life do you know has this information that you think is a good person to listen to in this, a good person to ask, and who do you think is still a good person, but is not the right person to help you in this area. And this is a really, again, these are hard conversations for many people to have. And it's hard for them not to write everybody on everything. But it's a great conversation to say, do you really think that everybody should help you with everything? And this is oftentimes a really, really far longer process than you would think, because it requires a lot of conversation. And you can bring up issues about, well, does John really have this part of his life together for himself? And if not, maybe he shouldn't be the one that's guiding you or making suggestions to you in this area. After the person goes through that process of thinking about the choice, what areas that they want help with, who's going to help them with specific choices, this is an affirmation of what they have entered into. My supporters are not allowed to make choices for me. My supporters are not allowed to make choices for me. To help me with my choices, my supporters may help me find out more information about my choices, help me understand my choices so I can make good decisions, and help me to tell other people about my decisions. So this is, again, reminding them, this is what support looks like. This is how you know when someone's really supporting you as compared to taking over and overstepping the way that they're there to help you. For the supporters, we do the same thing. For the supporters, we go through the process of making sure that they understand what their role is and where the line is that they should stay within. And so this part says, I, Steve, consent to act as John's supporter under this agreement. I understand that my job as a supporter is to honor and express his or her wishes. My supports might include giving this person information in a way that he or she can understand, discussing the pros and cons of decisions, and helping this person communicate his or her choice. I know I may not make decisions for this person, and I agree to support this person's decisions to the best of my ability, honestly and good faith. This is a way to really cement as a supporter, this is what I am saying I'm going to do. One of the cool things about this document is not only does this define the roles for the person with disability about this is what support looks like, and not only does it define the role of the supporters, but you think about it, how many times have we maybe even tried our best to do this, and we still see other people in the person's life who are overstepping the boundaries. This is a tool for both the person with disability to say, you know what, this is what you said you were going to do. And it doesn't feel like you're doing that. You said that you were going to give me information, that you were going to support me with thinking through the process, and that maybe you'd help me communicate choices, you'd slow the process down. Those are the things you said you would do, and what you're really doing is you're telling me what I should do. So it's an opportunity for the person with disability to see that in paper, to use it as a talking point when if boundaries are being crossed. This is also a great tool if I'm a supporter on a team and I see another supporter. This is also a great tool for me to bring first to the person with disability to have that discussion that I just had, and then if needed for us to go to and for me to bring this conversation back to the supporter. And again, I can do that as a supporter to a fellow supporter who's crossing the line. So this is really a document that I encourage people to think about. And again, this is one example. There are many different examples. On our website, we do have a couple of others. But I like the clarity of this particular document. I like the way that it's simplified, and I like the choices. So it's one that I particularly chose. But again, you can change this. You can not only choose to use a different document, if there's something about this document that doesn't work, that can be modified as well. This is not something that has to be used line for line, word for word. It can be modified. If supported decision-making can be done without a document, an agreement, or with a document, what's the value of having the document? We've kind of walked through that. It's an opportunity to really discuss the strengths of a person with disabilities as well as the areas that they want help with. It's a way to limit and define the areas of support that the person is going to receive. It's a way to limit and define the way that support is given to a person. It allows for people to choose who they want as supporters. It allows them to choose the areas of support that they're going to receive. It's a great way of defining support, supporters, and how that happens. So I personally have believed that these agreements have a lot of value. And again, the conversations that happen just around the agreement itself are conversations that I very rarely hear outside of when people are working with agreements. I want to talk a little bit about using supported decision-making as compared to conservatorship. I want to make it real clear, there is a role in conservatorship in our society. There are people who need conservators. I also want to make real clear that for many of us, conservatorship has become something that has not been examined and has not been looked at as far as what are the implications of conservatorship and what are the alternatives. So I'd like to kind of highlight what conservatorship is and how supported decision-making can be an alternative to that. And so, as I say here, it is an important tool when it's needed, but it's important to recognize that conservatorship, by definition, is a legal removal of a person's rights to make decisions. It is a legal removal of that person's ability to make a decision. Those decisions are granted to someone else. In the best world, a person who has conservatorship is consulting and acting in the way that a person with disability wants. But a conservatorship is a legal removal of those rights, and the person who has that title is under no obligation to even have a conversation with that person about the decisions that they're making. So it's important to recognize that it's a legal removal. It's also important to recognize that conservatorship is something that once it's granted is almost never ended. There is a process to end a conservatorship, but it is something that very, very rarely happens even when it's tried to be undone. And the other part is that there are lots of ways to support people without conservatorship. And when a less restrictive option is available, we should be using the least restrictive option that can be easily reversed. And in a situation that conservatorship is later found to be necessary, we can grant it at that point. But we'll talk a little bit about a tool that is a really good way of walking through the decision of thinking about when a conservatorship is truly needed. So the question was, when a person is a conservator and that conservator dies, what happens after that conservator dies? It really depends on the type of conservatorship. It's a conversation that we can have. There are some conservatorships that end upon death. But it can be a situation to where a conservator is chosen. A conservator will be chosen by a judge. And oftentimes, if a conservator hasn't been assigned already, it will go to a public conservator. Or if families it can really end up with a lot of fights happening as well. I want to draw your attention, and this is a resource that's on the website. But in 2018, the National Council on Disabilities did a report about conservatorship, and it found 7 areas nationwide that were concerns. And it's interesting because I don't think that these are very well known by many people. And the first one is that states have very little data on who receives conservatorship and why. The states are not collecting that information. The second one is that there are many studies that show people with developmental disabilities are hugely underestimated in their capacity to make decisions. They're seen as childlike, and oftentimes the view is if the person can't make a decision completely on their own, if they can't walk into a doctor's office, understand everything and make a decision, that they need a conservatorship. And so again, the capacity for people to make decisions is widely underestimated. The research has shown numerous ways in which the rights of people with disabilities are not protected during guardianship proceedings. And again, we need to understand this is national data, this is national research. There are certain pockets where the protections are better enforced than others, but on a national, global level, they found glaring issues with protections that are granted within the guardianship process or the conservatorship process were not protected to the extent that they should have been. People who are doing capacity assessments oftentimes don't have training in that area, And there can be people who are recommending conservatorship over people who clearly have full capacity. Courts are not properly overseeing conservatorships to make sure that conservators are acting in the best faith, using their authority properly. They found research that says that most states have regulations that less restrictive measures are tried, but and California is one of those states that has a statute that says that least restrictive measures should be tried before a conservatorship is granted. But most families report that that as they went through the conservatorship process, that none of those other alternatives were even explored. And finally, that all states have processes to end guardianships, but as I said earlier, the research and the statistics are that once a conservatorship is granted, they're almost never reversed, regardless of how much effort went into getting them reversed. Disability Rights California has a fantastic resource on limited conservatorship, and one of the things that they point out is again that you need to try this less restrictive measures before a conservatorship is considered. And they list a broad range of less restrictive options that many people are just not familiar with. And that is not just lay people, not just families, but frankly, even within the courts, oftentimes are not familiar with the less restrictive options. The American Bar Association has an excellent guide that leads people through the process of determining whether or not a conservatorship is actually needed. This document is called the Practical Toolkit for Attorneys or Lawyers, and it is an excellent guide that, if you look, it gives the ability for people to say, first of all, like, what is the reason that we believe a conservatorship is something that we should be looking at? And it gives people ability to check off the issues that they're doing, as well as provide notes. This document is available in a hard copy. It's also available online as a fillable PDF that people can actually pull up during a note. And my encouragement is that as we are thinking about conservatorship, that what we would do is we would gather a team of people, go through this process in a very systematic way, and examine what are the challenges that we're experiencing, will a conservatorship actually address the concerns that we have, and what are the other ways that we could possibly explore this. And again, this is something that is on our resource at the end of your slideshow. It is on our website at the Mind Institute. So I encourage families to take a look at this, and certainly I would be willing and very happy to have a discussion with families as they are looking through this as a resource. So I'd also like to this slide here is from the National Council. I'm sorry, from the National Guardianship Association. And they have, so this is conservatorship in other states is oftentimes called a guardianship. And this is a voluntary association for conservators throughout the country. And these are two important statements. The first one being that whenever possible, that less restrictive measures should be examined, and when a conservatorship is necessary, that the principles of supported decision-making should be used by conservators. Now, again, this is their statement. The reality is a conservator who has the title of conservatorship can make the decisions without input. So I caution people, and I think that supported decision-making for anyone who has a conservatorship, that we advocate that these principles of involving people, the principles of allowing people access to decisions that are made about them are used. But it's important to recognize, again, that conservatorship does not, there's no way of enforcing these principles within a conservator who's decided that they're going to make the decisions on their own. So, as I mentioned, California does not have a conservatorship statute that says, I'm sorry, a supported decision-making statute that recognizes supported decision-making as a legal framework. With that said, take a look at some of these ways that we can support people outside of conservatorship. For people who are concerned about medical information, there's ways that you can sign a HIPAA release. The very last pages of the document that you receive is a simplified release of medical information. It's a simplified HIPAA release. There's ways that people can sign assignment of educational decision-making if you're concerned about, and education goes far beyond school. It can also be programs that people experience as adults. And people can sign forms saying, I want other people to be involved in these processes. There's healthcare, power of attorney and advance directives, and we'll look through a form in just a minute. That's something that is being used by people with disabilities. There's power of attorney for finances. You can arrange for payees. There are many, many ways. And you think about our aging parents. We oftentimes, I've done this with several of my wife and my parents, where we have been very involved in their health care and other decisions without having conservatorship, by including them in the process and saying, can you tell the person that you would like me to have a conversation on the phone? Or can you invite me into this meeting? There are many ways that we can stay engaged and stay involved in these decisions without needing the power of a conservatorship. So this is the simplified advanced care directive that I mentioned. And this is a really interesting form. When we think about advanced care directives, we oftentimes think that it's something that will happen at the end of our lives, and that when we're no longer able to make these decisions for us because of old age. Advanced care directives, though, are now being used more and more often in California. This is a California-specific one. This is one that's been approved by, to be used within the state of California. And it's this form I love so much because it has graphics. It walks through a number of medical issues that people may experience. It allows people to have conversation about how do you want to handle specific situations. And take a look at this part. This is a page that says that when do I want a person involved in my life to make decisions? If you look at the bottom, it says only after I'm unable to make decisions for myself, or I would like to have someone to help make decisions now. In this case, it's actually assigning the person the right to make decisions for me. You can fill this page out, but then this is the next section. And this next section says, do I want someone else to make decisions for me on a regular basis? Or the next one, I prefer to make medical decisions only after input from others. And you have the opportunity then to name who the people who are going to be assisting with your medical decision-making as a healthcare agent to do that. The nice thing about this document is that there have been some problems with doctors honoring advanced care directives as well as other things, because the question is, could the person really sign this? Could the person understand this? One of the things I like about this document is that it is in simplified language, and and you can bring the entire document to show the process that you engaged with the person towards making this. towards making the decisions about the things that they have asked to happen, or the fact that they've simply named someone to do it. We've had situations to where the person has checked and says, I prefer to make medical decisions after being involved with others. And if a doctor decides not to honor that piece, they oftentimes would honor the part that says, I have named this other person to be able to make a healthcare decision for me. So this has the flexibility that many people are looking for to cover both ends of, I do want to have a role with this, but in the situations where a doctor says, I don't think that you really are capable of it, the second part allows for the doctor to say, oh, but you have named this agent to when you're not able to make a decision, for that person to make the decision for you. So medical is one of the issues, the most realistic issue for many people to seek conservatorship. I would encourage people, though, to take a look to see if this is an option that reaches the capacity of the person to be able to understand this. And if nothing else, to say, I want this person to be the person that I trust to make the decisions for me. And this can be a way where the conservatorship does not need to happen if the person's able to understand and participate in this form. So this form would be done by you and the person that you're supporting, and it's brought in to the medical appointment after it's been completed. And hopefully both you and the person with disability would be present when this document is given to the doctor. One of the things about the Advanced Care Directive that's important to state, it's a very long document. You don't have to complete all of it. You don't have to complete all the parts that say, for example, if I need to be intubated, and they say it in a much clearer way than that, but if I need assistance, if I need a machine that's going to help me breathe, or with my, keep my heart alive. So you don't need to do all parts of that, but you should do the parts that name your healthcare agents. But it's something that, again, I would encourage you to look at the full form. If you feel you need someone to consult with it, I would encourage you to get consultation on it. This is just a slide that shows the difference between conservatorship and doing supported decision making. In conservatorship, one of the advantages, you have clear legal authority. When you hold the title of conservatorship, everyone knows what that means, and it is recognized in every situation that you have the authority granted to you. We didn't really talk about the fact that conservatorship can be limited, and many people who get conservatorship and have limited conservatorship will oftentimes assert authority over areas that they really genuinely don't have, which is a real problem. But if you have a conservatorship and you have the powers that you're working under, you have a very clear title and you have very clear legal authority. I understand why that is very attractive to families. Whereas in supported decision making, it is an informal process at this point in California. It is an informal process. It requires you to involve the person with disability in a very active way. Oftentimes, they need to state that, yes, I want this person to be present. I want this person to be assisting me. So it is not as cut and dry as a conservatorship. Conservatorship, the conservator is the decision maker, whereas in a supported decision making arrangement, the person with disability retains those abilities to make the decisions for themselves. Conservatorship is a formal removal, permanent, of a person's rights, whereas in supported decision-making, a person retains the rights. Within conservatorship, it's a very formalized process. The courts need to make all the changes that happen only when the courts agree to those changes. Whereas supported decision-making is a very fluid process. You can easily change supporters. You can easily change the powers that a person is asking for support in. Conservatorship is a lifelong process, except for in very few situations where a judge will agree to end it, whereas a supported decision-making arrangement is very, very fluid, and it can be changed, modified, or ended at any point. How to get started. The first one is you've made some process today, in terms of getting the information, getting access to the resources that we have. I encourage you to really spend some time looking at the resources. I am someone who, if you're interested, give me a call. We will set up a conversation. I can't give you legal advice. I can't do, something of that nature. But if you ask specific questions about documents and other things, I can point you towards the things that are available. I encourage people who are considering conservatorship to really use that American Bar Association guide. It is a very thoughtful way to make a rational choice, to examine the options, to examine the person's abilities, and to really examine, will a conservatorship even do what the types of protections that people are seeking when they are thinking about getting a conservatorship. And I really encourage you to use all those resources, including the Disability Rights California resources are very, very good. Here's a list of the resources. I know on your printout it's going to be very small. If you contact me, I will send you a larger list of resources. We have a companion guide that is being produced that will have these resources, as well as a lot of the information from our videos distilled into a small companion booklet. If you're interested in any of those things, please contact me, and I'll be more than happy to provide you with information and resources. We would like to thank the WITH Foundation that, through a generous grant, allowed us to do the work for researching supported decision-making, as well as the presentations that we're doing across the state and tonight.
The UC Davis Mind Institute was created in 1998 with a promise to find cures for neurodevelopmental disorders. Every day, our physicians and researchers come closer to fulfilling that promise. Their groundbreaking research on autism, Fragile X syndrome, chromosome 22q11.2 deletion syndrome, ADHD, and other brain disorders are helping children achieve their fullest potential. Please visit our website to find out more about current studies, upcoming events, and how you can help make a difference.